Yeah.
Well, without further ado, we'll start without Joshua. Hopefully he'll be able to join. I've just texted him again the credentials and the Zoom link. So welcome everybody. Digital Davos 2022. It was 4 years ago now that Oliver Michael Sung, who's on the call, Dr. Oliver Kraus, and Carl and myself put together the One World Blockchain Alliance. And if that didn't cost us enough hair, we're ready to do this all over again.
Sorry, one me.
Go ahead.
Lines were Michael Sung and you. I cannot get any credit for this. And now this conversation,
neither.
I was speaking, I was on it, but I was not an organizer. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, can I just say that Oliver and Carl, you did a great job 4 years ago when we were at the hotel, the Hard Rock Hotel for 3 days. Now we're doing 3 days online because it's the second year in a row now that we've had the World Economic Forum canceled. For everybody who doesn't know, Digital Davos is a close second to the WEF, to the World Economic Forum. When Dr. Klaus cancels it, we move in fast. And I just want a big shout out to Dr. Carl Selig. Thank you for leading us through this and getting it all together. This is the last of 5 panels I am moderating. My name is Professor James Cooper. I am a professor of law at California Western School of Law in San Diego. I'm also a research fellow at the Singapore University of Social Sciences, and just excited to be here, one of the co-creators, along with Oliver and Carl in this. Joshua's trying to get in. If Hazel or one of the teams over in Beverly Hills could please let him in. Joshua James is trying to get on, please, as a speaker. And without further ado, let me introduce our panel. We are right now trying to look at DAOs. It's a primer. We're looking at decentralized autonomous organizations. We've got with us my partner and longtime friend, Professor Dr. Michael Sung, who is the co-director and co-founder of the Fanhai FinTech Research Center in Fudan University in Shanghai. He's a futurist, an engineer, a rainmaker, a deal broker, and a serial entrepreneur. Michael, welcome. Thank you for staying up overnight. It's 6:30 in the morning for you in Shanghai. We've also got with us Dr. Oliver Kraus, entrepreneur, investor, advisor, and principal at Eventum Partners and Liquid Team. We've also got with us Joshua James, also known out there in the blogosphere as PonderJaunt. He's one of the founders of co-founders of the San Diego Blockchain Forum, and he's a thought leader in blockchain, crypto, and NFTs. And finally, last but not least, John Montague, who is a principal and founder of ETH Law. He's a attorney and does a lot of work in the blockchain crypto space, and we're very excited to have him here as well. He's going to be our resident practicing lawyer. So welcome, John. And you're live from Dallas or from Austin?
I'm from Austin. I was at North American Bitcoin Conference and just got in, so excuse my hotel background, but thank you for having me. Very excited to be here.
Great to have you. And I'm just super excited to be talking about DAOs. Joshua, are you there? And you can unmic yourself, and maybe we'll start with you because you're the youngest of everybody. What's a DAO?
Yeah, great question. And it's changing every day, honestly. But a DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization, which is a relatively new and exciting way for individuals to start to organize around automated programmable code like smart contracts. And with this, they can start to raise funds and maintain and upgrade distributed protocols without necessarily doing so with a traditional corporate structure. So it starts to pass responsibility to individuals to design and develop governance structures that allow them to use value in protocols that they own.
Great. Now you talk about distributing ownership or distributing responsibility. What about legal liability? John, you're the lawyer in the group. What happens with legal liability? Because isn't the whole idea of a company limited liability and shielding the shareholders from potential problems going forward?
Yeah, so I think we're talking about DAOs in a loose sense, which you could create a decentralized autonomous organization without a formal legal entity or any jurisdiction. If you do choose a jurisdictional nexus, that can provide legal protections under law. Like a good example in the United States, which I'll speak on because that's where I am, is what Wyoming's done. with their DAO legislation and folding in that concept to the Limited Liability Act.
Okay. What about things like if you do it as a legal a corporation, things like minority shareholder rights, directors and officers liability, insurance, stuff like that?
Yeah, so I think you have to consult on the laws in each jurisdiction to determine what those rights would be to the extent that they are. For the most parts, if you're doing an LLC structure, it's going to default to the default rules unless the operating agreement or DAO agreement says otherwise. But yeah, there's been a lot of successful DAOs created on some of these new legislation and these new territories, and you've got massive DAOs like Aave, for example, that are doing some very sophisticated things. With respect to liability, I think that's our insurance. I think that's an issue. I think in some instances you can defer to standard sort of like corporate officer director liability insurance, depending on how you structure things. And in other instances, there are some more industry specific solutions coming out. Like if you're dealing with like a uni or a sushi where some of the members are pseudo-anonymous.
Thank you for that. Oliver, switching over to Germany where you are you seeing a lot of DAOs there? And if not in Germany, is there a place in Europe, a jurisdiction that's seeing a lot of first movers creating DAOs?
Yeah, we are definitely seeing a lot of DAOs here, and this goes back actually to the early days, the infamous DAO project, which led to the Ethereum hard fork. This was actually a Germany-based project. And I yesterday had a conversation here in another DAO panel where Wolf Carl mentioned that there are at least 10,000 DAOs globally around, and he expects that number to go up to 50 to 100K in this year. A huge explosion. I cannot speak to the to preferred jurisdictions or so. I personally am involved in a number of DAOs myself, and they are interestingly pure DAOs, so they don't use a legal structure, legal entity structure, by the way, which also gives some headache as soon as you want to interact, for instance, with the real world, let's say, or the traditional world, where you have to close contracts, for instance, with athletes or their management and IP rights and all those things are involved. Yeah, who is your counterpart? And also liability aspects, I would say. Anyway, but I'm maybe going too deep now and didn't answer directly your question. So James, back to you.
Spoken like a true law professor. I'm not going to answer that question. I'll answer a different one. Now to the professor from Shanghai, Michael Sung. What's your opinion of the evolution of DAOs, and do you think this kind of disruptive form of governance is going to replace traditional modes of governance in the near future?
Yeah, well, I certainly think that there's a huge amount of innovation in the space, and but I would like to say that these are really early days, right? I think actually a lot of these sort of DAO governance structures are largely unbattle tested, and for the most part, I think there is a lot of complexity and sophistication to these things that where I think when these things are tested, they might actually fall apart. So I kind of liken the idea of decentralized governance kind of like to communism. Like it's in theory it's good, but in practice, because of the way that they're set up, it's kind of hard to actually implement in practice, but by and large, human behavior tends to run counter to some of the ways that will allow it to function properly. So not to say that it won't evolve into something that's more mature. I as an investor am invested in various sort of DAO infrastructure companies, hoping to create more, I would say, for lack of a better word, institutional grade DAOs, right? I mean, the DAO movement right now is akin to that sort of ICO boom in 2017, right? It's a huge explosion, lots of innovation, highly unregulated, lots of scammy type stuff, and it's going to be a while before this evolves into more mature forms where the governance structures are well set out. The sort of legal the sort of I guess what's the word, the solidity of these concepts are established. So I think we're on that evolution, but I think it should be very, very fascinating to watch and see how things evolve, right? I think a big issue is it's always about the corner cases, right? I mean, you can set up your governance structures any way you want, but there's all sorts of attack vectors that are completely unexplored. Famous DAOs like the Constitution DAO, for example, they weren't as decentralized as one would think, right? Because they were afraid of the fact that the whales might come in and take over the DAO and things like that. So in the end, a lot of these sort of decentralized structures may not be decentralized at all, right? Or so you have this issue, which I think is endemic to crypto in general, which is the idea of decentralization is very powerful and the story is very strong, but in the end you end up with something that's not that decentralized at all. So there's still a lot of work to be done, and but of course as with all things, this sort of unfettered innovation will eventually lead to that slope of enlightenment and sort of the hype cycle where you end up with stuff that actually works and moves the ball forward.
Thank you. Oliver, did you want to add something?
Exactly. I wanted to add exactly to that point that a lot of those DAOs are not really decentralized. That's true. And it also makes sense, at least in the starting phase, because otherwise the whole thing will never gain traction and, let's say, establish a solid structure. So the initiators have to have a relatively strong voice in the beginning and then start to decentralize decision making, because that's what is a key element. So the members of a DAO can make proposals on certain aspects which have to be defined, and these structures have to be established over time. And they have, so to speak, a say on the topics that are up for decision. And this is done typically via, or I've seen that, or I'm participating in some of those snapshot proposals, such a platform where you connect your wallet and then vote in a DAO. And suddenly contributors to the actual operation, but also retail investors and token VC funds have a level playing field. That's actually the innovation I see there. And that's pretty fascinating. So the whole topic is certainly experimental, but I see a lot of good things coming out of that in terms of the future of how we build organizations in the future and how we involve the individuals contributing there.
Thank you for that. There is that inherent tension between centralization and decentralization, which runs not just through DAOs, but as was earlier mentioned, through blockchain, through digital, through central bank digital currencies. Does that fly in the face of everything you're trying to do, Joshua? I mean, you're like one of the pure thinkers about this. You're about that idea of decentralization. How does that work for you?
I mean, I think it's a really exciting opportunity. Again, individuals, I think, have had access to some of these expansive financial markets due to investor regulations and definitions, and having the ability to generate value through these decentralized protocols, such as like Ethereum, and having access to do more with that value, starting with the individual, I think is very important. So the way that I approach it is, there's not too much of an opportunity left to not take a hold of that right as an individual and utilize some of the utility that's being generated, specifically the value there, because we do see governments and corporations looking at these same structures, probably with a little bit different intention. And so again, I think it is important for the individual to approach this with a really passionate understanding of its potential and get involved early.
You know, mention was we heard earlier about the so-called the DAO hack and the DAO and the SEC. Joshua, once we're sticking with you, and then maybe John can fill in any gaps. What happened in 2017, and why was it? You know, what happened with the DAO, and why did it run afoul of the Securities and Exchange Commission?
Yeah, I think Oliver mentioned this. I mean, this is a very infamous hack of the original Ethereum mainnet, which forced a hard fork and created Ethereum Classic and what we now know as the Ethereum mainnet, which continued. The outcome of, I think, the individual investors' exposure to that event and having it be, like Michael expressed earlier, like this battle test, like it was code that was manipulated and exploited. That gave the SEC, I think, its first kind of bite into some of these distributed marketplaces, specifically within distributed finance. And we can see the result of that. I mean, this is Jay Clayton's SEC in 2017. And we can see Gensler now pursuing action as well, I think, trying to define a little bit more as to what digital assets and common goods might look like by definition. And so I think this is that early indicator that the government and regulatory bodies, specifically in the United States, we're going to try to draw parallels between traditional securities laws and the past historical legal precedent that surrounds that, and these very innovative, hyper dynamic financial instruments that are being designed by groups of individuals with little to zero legal liability. So this was, like, I think the impetus for seeing more action over time. The biggest one right now is Ripple versus the SEC, and I think there's undertones of some of these securities questions visible in the DAO case as well. So it's really cool to kind of look back and see how this interoperability between these protocols from a regulatory standpoint is starting to get to the definition level. And I think individuals, again, approaching that DAO and starting to define these things themselves will hold weight for sure moving forward.
Well, then what kind of chilling effect did that give us, John, in terms of from 2017 on? It didn't stop ICOs. It certainly didn't stop the ongoing work of a lot of the industry's several $1 trillion now. What are did you see your work change as a result? Oh, sorry, you're muted.
I think there was a bit of a silver lining to that report from the SEC, and that's that they acknowledged it reached a certain level of decentralization where it stopped becoming a security, and that I think helped some of the more centralized companies like Coinbase and Gemini be able to really dig their take a bigger bite at the apple, so to speak, and build more on-ramps and infrastructure. While, unfortunately for the United States, the rest of the world just kind of moved on. Like if you look at Switzerland, they've developed this like robust regulatory framework for these assets, and where, Ethereum was started there. And so I feel like, different jurisdictions kind of moved on, and now the US is playing like sort of catch up. And I think it's really interesting, Gensler sort of backpedaling on, some of that previous guidance on television and being like, well, is it, I don't know if it's a security or not, and just kind of introducing ambiguity. So I think it's a really interesting time to be a securities attorney and, be in digital assets with respect to a regulatory framework in the United States and abroad. I think we're at kind of an inflection point.
Given that Professor Gensler, MIT, Sloan School professor who taught a course just recently on blockchain before he joined the SEC as chair. Michael, you're a graduate of MIT. I've got your EE PhD from there. But then you have moved your way into the People's Republic of China, and for many years formed a bridge between the West and the East. How does China view, and Chinese regulators, how do they view DAOs, especially in light of, say, state-owned enterprises and the recent crackdown on technology in China generally?
Yeah, so the Chinese government has really put a line in the sand, really. I think this past year, there's been a real regulatory crackdown on what I deem unregulated crypto, right? So Bitcoin has been finally stamped out. The exchanges was already sort of outlawed a couple years ago, and then more recently now Bitcoin mining. And the financial industry is not allowed to touch anything related to crypto. ICOs are basically completely gone, and this time it seems like there's a definitively a deeper, more serious tone to that. So that's not coming back. DAOs, being an unregulated form of new structure and things like that, certainly would not be allowed in this new regulatory sort of scenario, right? So yeah, it's very interesting. But that being said, for China, blockchain as a technology has been announced by Xi Jinping and everybody else all the way down as being a very highly supported technology written in the 5-year plan in the sort of national strategy as a fundamental infrastructure to connect all other infrastructures, right? Connecting cloud and allowing data to be shared and things like that. So you see this nice tension that was previously discussed, right, between centralization and decentralization. In the end, my notion is that what will probably evolve in China will be some sort of hybrid system, right, where there is some form of decentralization, but it's more akin to maybe a permission blockchain than a fully decentralized blockchain. There'll be whitelisted entities that can be nodes and do things, and there is a power of having some decentralization, and that type of thing will be allowed. There was a project called the Blockchain-Based Service Network recently last year. Is the China's top blockchain interoperability protocol, and in that there was something that was developed called the Open Permission Blockchain, which is basically detokenized and whitelisted versions of the sort of unregulated decentralized versions internationally. So, for example, Ethereum internationally could be created into a compatible but sort of almost like a permissioned version of that, and then the tokens associated with Ethereum, ETH, would be replaced with RMB, and then eventually their ECNY, which is slated to be commercially released by the PBOC in time for the Olympics in a few weeks. So we see this really nice, interesting hybrid, right? From my standpoint, more at a sort of metaphysical or philosophical level, I believe that decentralization is a very powerful tool. But as I mentioned before, the analogy I like to use is like communism. Ironically, in this context, it's a form of governance that is theoretically better, but the practice of implementing is very difficult. So I think what will happen though is that once you have a form of decentralization, it kind of just tends to increase. So I think what will happen, and we're researching this at our research center at Fudan, is how do we create hybrid systems? One where the central government still feels like they're in control, which is very important for the Communist Party, but one where eventually you can slowly decentralize, and in the end you end up with a hybrid state somewhere in between that's been optimized, and like as we discussed with the DAOs, has been battle tested and hardened and rigorous, so that the government feels that it's not going to cause undue disruption into the industry. That's a very key point. That overall is what the Communist Party is mostly concerned about, is at this point stability, both in their financial ecosystem, their institutional ecosystem, and in a larger by society in general. So as long as there's been some well thought out rules to these things, I would say in the future there will be more and more decentralization. But at the present stage, that's minimal.
Thanks for that, Oliver. What's the view from the EU? Is there like a Wyoming of the European Union? Is Malta or Estonia getting in on sort of being the DAO capital?
I think there's no DAO capital, I would say, but as I think Berlin as one of the I would say centers here in the whole development. I mean, it was home to the Ethereum early projects and other developments. Is certainly a place where a lot of experimental projects start. And I know personally, I mean, two DAOs here, where I'm involved, is Meta Game Hub and SpoolFI, the one in the metaverse, the other one in giving access to DeFi protocols. They are very innovative, and they face a lot of institutional interest as well. So I see that as an area where we'll see in the West certainly a lot of adoption. We will see an alignment with regulatory topics, certainly, but overall, I'm long-term very bullish that we will see new forms of organizations emerging from this.
John, is this like a race to the bottom, like any other kind of regulation, where whoever has the least number of rules makes it as easy as possible for DAOs will win? And can you answer that in the context of what Wyoming's doing in the US, please?
Yeah, so I think Wyoming has provided a sort of sandbox, if you will, for and we're going to see a spread to that. And it's, yeah, like you said, almost like Delaware had the most robust, sort of like laid back corporate structure, and now it's the most sophisticated, and their fees have gotten higher, but it wasn't always that way, right? I think we're seeing that with Wyoming, with them getting a head start, but I also think it also matters, what's happening on the federal level and global, and sort of where the market participants are, right? Because in the reality is a lot of these regulations are dealing with investor protection, at least in the United States, and I think our identification, like KYC requirements. And I think the jurisdiction where the people are located is going to be able to throw its weight around. It's just kind of the reality. That's who has the power. So I think that's sort of the counterbalance, but obviously it's a little bit, maybe you can outrun the bear and, like, Liechtenstein, right? So I certainly think entrepreneurs have taken that strategy and establishing their protocols in different jurisdictions that are a little bit more friendly. And it's certainly not been a terrible way to proceed.
And this idea of the bear being, you're not going to necessarily outrun the bear, but you have to outrun the guy next to you. To continue that metaphor. Because of time, we're going to have to move to our lightning round. And that's, you've got 30 to 45 seconds to answer this question, everybody, please. DAOs, is it hype or is there hope? Oliver, you want to start, please?
Yeah, I think as I already answered part of that, I'd just say I'm very hyped by current projects around tokenization and DAOization in the carbon credits market and also synthetic fuels markets. That's two projects I'm working with. So I see a great future there.
Right. So interesting, you're hyped, but you see it as a hope.
As a hope. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So I just want to be sure. Yeah.
That's
a double meaning for hype. In this sense, hype being like Michael talked about the fraudsters, like it was in 2017, the ICOs. Okay.
No.
John, how about you? HyperHope.
I'm gonna say hope. I've been sort of dreaming about internet, companies and autonomous structures for a long time, and I think Ethereum's done a really great job of showing how something works well and is redundant and transparent. So I'm hopeful that the market participants are going to lead the way and go above and beyond, and that this can sort itself out. But I do expect government regulation, so got to be careful.
Yes, sometimes a little slower than we might like, or in your case, maybe for your clients, not slow enough. But thank you for that. Joshua James, Punderjont, HyperHope.
I think like any kind of emergent technology, it started with a lot of hype, and I'm actually pretty hopeful based on very recent conversations that things are maturing in the right direction. Vitalik just gave some excellent insight in Wyoming based on a lot of the DAO conversations occurring there, and I think getting more towards or getting away from coin-based governance, I think is going to be a really exciting thing to watch happen over the next year or two. And then again, just keep an eye on the government and the regulatory conversations. I'm hopeful that there's an understanding on where the individuals are coming from. In this case, loud voices, which I don't think they've heard before. It's really exciting time to be involved in DAOs.
And the industry is maturing. You can't be worth trillions of dollars and still do it without a lobby group and without putting on your big boy pants. Dr. Professor Michael Sung, live from Shanghai tomorrow. HyperHope, the DAOs that we're talking about.
I'm gonna have to side on the other side. I think it's mostly hype. The same way that ICOs in 2017 and ICOs continue to be hype. Okay, but I think it's it's one where I'm basically a pragmatic optimist, right? So I do see hope in the future. I think it will evolve that way, but I think we're in early days, and it's going to take a lot of work to get to there. As a student of complexity theory, I think and also one of human nature, I think that combination is a hard duo to beat. So I think it's going to be a while before we get to a form that actually really works. But certainly, this is the path, right? You start out with this unregulated, unfettered innovation. There's going to be a lot of scams, a lot of things that don't work, and then eventually, out of that crucible of innovation, we're going to get somewhere beautiful.
Thank you. From your mouth to God's ears. Professor Dr. Michael Sung from Fanhai FinTech Research Center at Fudan University in Shanghai. Thank you. Dr. Oliver Krause, entrepreneur, investor, advisor, and principal at Advantum Partners and Liquid Team. Thank you. Joshua James, also known as Ponderjont, from the San Diego Blockchain Forum and a thought leader. Thank you. And from ETH Law, live from Austin, Texas, but in Florida, John Montague, Esquire. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, Carl, for helping us put all this stuff together. This has been a Davos, Digital Davos 2022 primer on DAOs. So thank you all. I'm Professor James Cooper. Thank you and good night wherever you are. Thanks, everybody.